Hello, and welcome back to Living a Culture of Life podcast by Human Life International. I'm your host, Colleen, and I'm very glad to have you join us today. Did you know that Vatican City and the Philippines are the only two countries in the world where divorce is still illegal? One topic that's come up a lot in our mission field is the push to legalize divorce in the Philippines. This always struck me as a really interesting topic because, on the surface, legalizing divorce may seem like such a small attack on the family compared to things like legalizing same sex marriage, or transgenderism, or surrogacy. So, on today's episode, Father Shenan Boquet, our president here at HLI, joins us to discuss this push to legalize divorce, and Father explains why the state should have a vested interest in protecting the sanctity of marriage. It's a really interesting episode, and I hope that you enjoy it. As always, if you're listening on our audio platforms, please pause right now and leave us a 5-star review. This will help the algorithm push up our show to new audiences. And if you're listening on YouTube, please like this video and subscribe to our channel so that you'll get new episodes every Thursday. Without further ado, please welcome Father Boquet to Living a Culture of Life. Welcome back to the podcast, Father.
Well, Colleen, great to be back with you after a very lengthy mission in New Zealand.
I can't wait to hear about that trip at some point. We're going to have to talk about it. Yeah.
Came back with a little more of a little raspy voice. I picked up a little sinus infection while there, but today's much better, thank goodness. But didn't deter me from doing 2 weeks of lectures and presentations. It just sounded more like a little New Orleans jazz singer, giving those presentations. But the devil has been trying to silence me for years. But we just keep going. Going.
Did you watch Lord of the Rings on the flight on the way there?
No, actually, I had a couple of books to read, and I was someone had given me a wonderful book on the history of the of New Zealand, not the Philippines. I have one from Ireland as well. So I had both of those books, and it was quite interesting. Just kind of it occupied most of my time. It's about 1,000-page book, so
wow. Yeah,
I enjoyed reading.
Yeah, I'm sure it would. How long is the flight over there?
Well, it total was about 26 hours of travel time.
I don't know how you do that.
But it gives me lots of time to read good books. But The Lord of the Rings was definitely on many other screens I saw. So I got a chance to see some of it by just walking down the aisle.
It always cracks me up on your mission board. Whenever you're going to New Zealand, you'll just say the Shire.
That's right. Exactly. It's a great time to watch the series because it's so many hours of travel.
Yeah, exactly. Well, for today, I would like to do a kind of 2-part episode talking about the push to legalize divorce in the Philippines, and then using that as a springboard to discuss the more broader idea that the state has a vested interest in upholding the sanctity of marriage.
Sure.
So you have been to the Philippines many times, Father.
Right.
Could you tell our audience a little bit about, first of all, the culture there, and then how there has been this push to legalize divorce over the past couple of decades?
Right. So out of all the countries I've been to, which are now 95, and the Philippines is probably one of my most visited of countries. So I'll be there in November, very briefly, literally just traveling through, which is very hard because I do very much enjoy being in the Philippines. And I think, Colleen, it's because of the culture that is so attractive. And that is, it's such a Catholic culture, a family-oriented culture, a culture that really strives to respect other people. And you can see it in how people treat each other, how they honor their elderly, how they respect their elderly. As many people know who have been among the Filipinos, that there's a beautiful gesture of taking an elder's hand or someone of authority and placing it to their own forehead. It's a sign of respect.
Yeah.
And it's something that can be quite shocking, when you're not used to this, especially when you're in a very large group of Filipinos. I remember one bishop in one of the countries I was there to give lectures to the Philippine community, and he had never been among the Filipinos. And I expressed to him what to be prepared for after Holy Mass, that he would go out and greet, the community. And he came back in with a smile from ear to ear. He says, this must be what the Pope feels like, because they were just so attentive to him and just wanting his blessing.
Yeah.
And that's what you experience in the culture. From the youngest, even a child that's capable of understanding will reach for your hand. But just the attitude, there's a joyfulness, and it makes it very attractive to be among the Filipino community, whether they be outside the country, because there are about 12 million Filipinos outside of the Philippines.
Yeah.
But while in the Philippines, the Catholic culture is very rich. It's very present. I remember, especially as someone from the United States, being able to celebrate Palm Sunday liturgy.
Yeah.
And we're talking thousands upon thousands of people gathered in the body of the church, outside of the church. It was just, it's an overwhelming sensation of faith, of a desire to practice their faith, and a sincerity in that, to hear the joyful singing, the participation. Obviously, hearing children is something so beautiful, and because there still is an openness to life, though it's under threat now. But currently, one of the threats that we're going to talk about a little bit and use it as our springboard is the threat of divorce in the Philippines.
Yeah. What is the attitude in the Philippines currently towards marriage if divorce is not legal there?
Correct. So, and just to kind of let our audience know, so currently this is, I forget how many attempts now by certain elements within the Congress to legalize divorce. So, as we know, the Philippines is the only country outside of Vatican City where divorce is not legal. And so, just for our audience to have really a picture of this, it was not until really the 1960s that we would see such a global change of position on the issue of marriage, meaning the state had a vested interest. I know we'll come back to this in a little while, but the Philippines has been able to maintain that. And partly it's because of its Catholic root, because the bishops have been very vocal, priests have been very vocal, educating the population on the issue. But just for our audience, if they're interested in seeing what the bill both in the Senate and in the House are trying to communicate. No matter what the bill says, it is not a good for the Philippine community. It's not good for society. It's harmful, and it's good to see that there is a tremendous pushback. So, but every time it comes to the table, obviously, it wins over more because of corruption, because of a lack of formation, education, and sometimes just the silence of people thinking, well, it'll never happen, but they let their guard down.
Yeah.
So basically, it was the House Bill 9349, and the Senate bill was 2443, and this was the 19th Congress. So as a result, the House sadly passed the bill.
Okay.
The Senate did not.
Okay.
So, which meant it's tabled for this year. So, but we already hear that there's an effort to come back again, which is no different than we would see with the issue of abortion, with euthanasia, assisted suicide, and some of the things that are continuing to be pushed by the anti-life culture.
Well, I remember Dr. Lagaya, our regional director for that region, saying that a lot of Western money is funding, like being poured into trying to push this divorce bill through, and then also that there's been a lot of pushback from the Catholic Church. So do you find, in your knowledge of this bill, is it the Catholic Church that's really leading the charge against legalizing divorce, or is it also just something that the culture people who live there don't want?
It's a both and, because so first of all, it's important to realize the influence of the church in the Philippines, because we're dealing with about 80% of the population being Catholic. Again, whether that whole 80% is practicing faithfully their faith, that's a different question. But because the strongest percentage of the population identifies as Catholic, has been associates through their Catholic faith. There's, I'm in airports in the Philippines, as I mentioned earlier, often, and it's amazing whether it be the security guard, whether it be the police, whether it be the military, to any of the crew, the staff. If they see a priest or religious, there is a response, so you can feel the culture. Even in the airport in Cebu, you will find images of Our Lady, of our Lord throughout the airport. There is, again, this culture. It really is a culture that's there. So, but the church really has been the bastion, through its vocalization, through its catechesis, through evangelizing. The challenge, however, again, is, eventually, it's kind of like the Chicken Little story, that, it didn't pass one time, it didn't pass a second time, so it'll never pass. We cannot let the guard down. And here, our shepherds, along with the shepherds, the pastors of the local churches, throughout the Philippines, with the priest and the religious and the lay faithful, we can't let the guard down. We have to continue to form people and really challenge those in Congress and the Senate that this is not good for the Philippines. It's not good for Catholic culture. It's not good for the culture as a whole. And we must say no to this.
Exactly. Well, and from what you were saying earlier, it does sound like people in the Philippines, whether or not they're practicing their faith, have a huge amount of respect for bishops and priests. So hopefully that will have some sway over whether or not the
Right.
people support this bill.
Right. Definitely there is a great respect for the bishops,
Hmm.
and for the clergy and religious as a whole. And so as a result, that's a good position to have in the sense of being able to discuss, be able to communicate.
Hmm.
But again, like anything else, we just cannot let, ourselves, kind of slip into just acceptance, that the people will not allow it. They're going to push against their legislators. But we all know, we see the
Hmm.
history, we know in other countries what happens
Yeah.
when we let the guard down. And we know that there's a tremendous amount of money, like Dr. Lagaya mentioned, that is flowing into the Philippines. Now, that used to come through USAID. Now that's been defunded in many ways, but it's coming through the United Nations. It's coming through NGOs. It's coming through foundations. Many people attempting, because think about this, it's a mindset
Hmm.
that's being trying to be overcome. And as we see in Europe, well, really all of the Western world,
Hmm.
right? And tragically in Latin America, where all the countries have succumbed to this issue.
Basically, the rest of the world except for the
That's
Philippines
right.
and the
So
Vatican
the
City.
idea is if you can overtake this last standing bastion,
Hmm.
then you've entrenched a mindset. You've
Yeah.
entrenched a behavior, very much like abortion, very much like the issue of contraception or the issues of euthanasia and assisted suicide. And we all know that the moment that you allow the first culprit in the door, which obviously is the assault on marriage and conjugal love through contraception
Hmm.
practice, that eventually you will see, like we're seeing here, where marriage is then put on the docket to be in a sense, its understanding being destroyed, diminishes its influence, break it down,
Hmm.
which ultimately breaks down the parental rights of that are there, which also affects the way parents teach their children, which you can see the whole thing just begin to spiral.
Hmm.
And this is what they're after. They know it. The other side of the aisle understands the strategy.
Yeah,
We don't
exactly.
always appreciate that, and we should.
One thing I want to go back to what we were saying before about priests and them, the church kind of helping lead the charge against this in the Philippines as well. It does go to show the importance of like the priest and seminarian training that we do around the world because of training where they're like taught how to speak on certain issues or what the
Right.
church teaches about certain issues. They're then able to get up in the like when they offer homilies or when they're guiding people individually, be
Correct.
able to actually explain what the church is teaching on marriages and how Catholics can approach these with prudence, but also in line with the
Exactly.
Catholic faith.
Exactly. And it's not, as we've said many times in our podcast and in our writings, it's not that the seminary formation is not providing a foundation,
Hmm.
but a lot of times we find is the ability to articulate, the ability to
Yeah.
debate, to discuss an issue. And this is one of the things that we heavily, strive to accomplish in our seminars and strategies of workshops,
Hmm.
to be able to help our brothers to be able to bring to bear the perennial teaching.
Hmm.
But not only that, but also healthcare workers,
Yeah.
by working with them on the issues that the church teaches, helps them to help other people because obviously they're on the front lines of this
Hmm.
debate. By working with those in legislation, those working on judicial, legal, those working in other professions of life, it's so vital
Hmm.
because this is again with the other side, the levels of influence. They work from the top down,
Hmm.
always has. So they work from an executive all the way down to social media, including education, healthcare, and they overtake it.
Hmm.
This is how they find inroad. And of course, what has God established? Family and the church. Doesn't mean that we don't strive, but where do all those people above number 8 come from?
Yeah.
From the family and from the church. So by really working within the body of Christ, it helps to influence what's above.
Hmm.
And eventually, as we've seen in many occasions, when people have a metanoia, a change of life, and turn back toward the Lord, they
Hmm.
bring that to bear in their various vocations and professions, which brings transformation.
Hmm.
So it's in our best interest, Colleen, as you noted, to continue to focus on these very targeted groups.
Okay, here's a curveball question. Or not curveball, but not one I gave you before the episode. Do you happen to know offhand how many priests and seminarians we've trained in the Philippines, or at least like how widespread that is?
Well, I don't know a number,
Okay.
But remember, we have been in the Philippines since the early 1990s.
Wow. Okay.
So we have, and because we have Dr. Rene Bolicer, that is from the Philippines, working primarily in the Philippines. We have who's been with us over 30 years. Dr. Lagayo Costa, who is, you mentioned already, is our regional director for all of Asia, Oceania, but she lives in Tacloban, so she's in the Philippines as well. So there's a lot of opportunity, of reaching out to seminarians, priests, religious, lay faithful, and that's happening on a weekly basis, particularly with Dr. Rene Bolicer, both also on radio.
Yeah.
So there's a large hand, if you will, a large network. So it's in the thousands. I mean, in the thousands.
Well, I remember there's one epic picture of you. I think it was the last time you were there, where you're preaching to a room and there was like 6,000 people there. It wasn't all priests and seminarians, but I love that photo because it silhouettes you really well, and then you just see the massive crowd that's there for the education.
And the majority of that particular group, there were two. One was which is in Ormoc City, which the city of beautiful people, was in Ormoc, and those were catechists mostly and healthcare workers.
Okay.
And back in Tacloban, in the Leyte area, we had a program following the one in Ormoc, where we had nearly 5,000 nurses and those in healthcare. So again, in the Philippines, because of the influence of the church, because of its openness to bear witness to the gospel of life, there are so many opportunities there that you just don't see in other parts of the world, and especially to have such a gathering of that many people. And if our audience might remember, even in Sorsogon City, at one time when Mayor Sally Lee was the mayor of that city, I mean, she declared the city a pro-life city. Nice. This was a direct influence of our Asian Pacific Congress on life, family, and marriage, and that she came back from and realized, wait a minute, something's got to change here. I remember her, and because we helped her with the programs, we met with all of the midwives, we met with all of the personnel of the city, from the military down to anyone that was employed by the city. Wow. We spent ample time. So it is a tremendous influence.
Yeah.
And there it was, Archbishop Bastes, God rest his soul, who was a very dear friend. He was the bishop of the Archdiocese of Sorsogon City, a wonderful man, and a great memory of him. And but he organized, events with the priest. He organized days of prayer, retreat. So there was this collaboration, which we don't always see here in the United States, but you see in the Philippines. So when you go back to culture, that's a culture. That's a society that is united, not perfectly, but united nonetheless in an ethical effort to bring forth a truth, the good of life, the good of marriage, and the good of family.
Okay, so I want to jump into discussing why the state should have a vested interest in upholding the sanctity of marriage. But before I do that, I want to give you a chance to tell our audience about a conference that you just mentioned, the Asia Pacific Conference. Could you just tell them what that is and how it impacts the Philippines and then the region around it? Because we're in the middle of an appeal right now to raise money for this year's, and I'd like you to be able to tell our audience about it.
That's awesome. Well, I hope our listeners will, consider being supportive both in prayer and in funding. So this is the 24th ASPAC. We call it the ASPAC, the Asian Pacific Congress on Life, Marriage, and Family.
Wow,
and
that's a mouthful.
It's a mouthful. And that's why sometimes we don't use ASPAC, because it just confuses people. What does this an acronym mean?
Yeah.
But the reality is being the 24th. And we'd love to do it every year, but right now we're having it every other year.
Okay.
This year will be in November, around our Thanksgiving time, and it's going to be in Cebu, Malaysia.
Okay.
So not Cebu, Philippines. That's where the last one was.
Yeah.
And it's going to be in Cebu, Malaysia. And the influence of this is far and wide. The last time we had nearly 25 countries represented. So it's not just within Asia, Oceania. We have people even come from the United States. We have people come even from Europe to participate. The Congress has a primary focus, and that is of encouragement and formation. So continued formation. So we bring in experts in the various bioethical fields, and that can range from those within the church, meaning our bishops, priests, religious, but also theologians, and we bring in lay leaders. So even from the Catholic Medical Association, we bring people to address the various bioethical life family issues that it's not just specific to Asia, Oceania, though that's the primary focus, because that's who you're dealing with mostly. Yeah. But the influence is wide, because now these people go back into their communities. So, for example, in Japan, a few years ago, prior to COVID, it's now having a difficult time beginning again, but it's there. And it's but the out was we had our first March for Life. Well, this is because of the ASPAC, because leaders came from Japan, small in number, but they were impacted, encouraged, strengthened. Dr. Legaya has been to Japan several times to reinforce it, and as a result, had one of the first Marches for Life in a country where we know the birth rates are tragically low, where the assault on life is very, very prominent. And so what a beautiful witness. But that's one example among many. So because of this Congress, we are now having influence in many parts of Asia and Oceania that we did not have, say, 20 years ago. So there is a wonderful network that has begun, that is being strengthened every year. So I would ask, our listeners to please pray for the fruitfulness of this and the success of the Congress, which begins on a Thursday evening, with a welcoming ceremony. We will actually have the papal nuncio of the area that is over Kota Kinabalu, over the Malaysia. I think he's over a couple of the regional countries there, but we'll be presenting the keynote. We have obviously many of the bishops that are from the area will be there, but we're having a tremendous amount of our team members that are coming in from Europe to be part of it. So we want to pray for safety of travel for everyone, but really the fruitfulness, the impact of the Congress.
I think it's the local archbishop, but I'm not 100% sure. Dr. Legaya was saying that he first was introduced to HLI's resources when he was in seminary. So that's also just a cool story arc where he's in seminary, is introduced to HLI's materials, and now he's the archbishop for this great conference.
Exactly. There. I think I believe that's the Archbishop of Kota Kinabalu, if I remember.
If that sounds right, yeah.
But I met him when he was the newly consecrated and installed archbishop. Nice. But it is, it just shows you when people often say, what are the measurables of HLI? Well, it's very hard for us because we have such a wide net of which we work in. And also the topics are not just a single focus. We work on all of the major topics from contraception to euthanasia and assisted suicide, the whole reproductive technologies to the assault on life at the end of life, the healthcare. And because of that, it's not always easy, like some of our collaborators in the pro-life movement who are single focused on a particular topic, and that's what they do day in and day out. Yeah. And they can measure those a little more easily. But this is an example where you had an influence on a seminarian, on a young priest. I can tell you one of Latin America, very similarly of recent. So these are things that show that there's a short-term gain, and there's also a long-term gain. Yeah. That we're involved in. So, and ASPAC is both and.
Yes.
And just like many of our congresses around the world.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Father, because we'd been writing an appeal letter on this and all that, and I've heard about it since I've come here. I've heard bits and pieces of the stories, but I never actually heard it all the way laid out like that.
Well, and just last time, it was nearly 1,000 people in the Philippines. The prior one was over 1,000 people. We typically get somewhere in that area, 1,000 to 1,200, depends where it is and how easy and accessible it is. Yeah. Getting to Cebu, Malaysia is a little more detailed to the point that I'm going to be puddle jumping quite a bit through the countries to get to this region. That could affect, but at the same time, right now, Dr. Legaya tells me registration is very strong.
Nice. That's wonderful.
People
I can't wait to hear.
I can't
wait to hear the stories from it and be able to share those.
See the pictures.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so Father, we're going back to Philippines. There's this push to legalize divorce, and that kind of raises this broader question of why does the state have a vested interest in protecting marriage? When we were talking about this episode yesterday, I was bringing up the fact that out of all the 7 sacraments, I'm pretty sure this is the only one that the state has any sort of civil counterpart to. So why does the state have a vested interest in upholding the sanctity of marriage, defending marriage? So can I just throw that over to you and
sure. Well,
that question?
To really try to answer that, I want to go to a recent comment of Pope Leo XIV.
Okay.
Actually, 2. And so he recently referred to the family as the cradle of humanity.
Okay.
So just let's keep that in mind and kind of think about that for our listeners. What a cradle is. We all can envision a bassinet, a cradle, right? And holding this great treasure, a child. But he's referring to the family being inside, quote, that bassinet and that cradle. And basically it means, as the church has always taught, through the Catechism of the Church, through the Second Vatican Council documents and so forth, that the family is that single unit upon which society is built. So using Pope John Paul II's comment in 1993 that our audience remembers vividly, he said that as the family goes, so goes society, so goes the world, or the nation. So we need to really think about those words, cradle, and think about as the family goes. And so if we assault the family, that single cell, that fundamental cell upon which everything is built, then we are affecting society, and we are affecting the world, the nation. Yeah. So the devil knows this. That's why it's a spiritual battle. And he knows this because he's assaulted the family from the beginning, because he realizes what the influence of the family is. Because as Pope Benedict said so often about the family, as the church teaches, we know that it's the fundamental school, the first school of learning. But beyond that, it's also where what Pope Benedict referred to as the first government. It's where the first hospital occurs. It's where all the firsts begin. And so why? Because parents are the primary educators. Now, at one time, up until recent history, nations knew this. Every country understood this. This was an understood from observation, from the natural law, the reality just from observance that an intact family, a stable family, is a healthy family, is good for society. Because this is where morality is taught. It's where principles of a nation are taught, where a culture is created, which Pope Leo XIII called a society is created. And this is where, again, parents teaching their children right from wrong, what is a good, how to live that good, living the commandments of God, living out the moral gospel values that are present to us. So through that formation, that cradle, all right, this wonderful, sanctuary is created. But like Scripture says, it's not meant to be hidden. Because it's the fundamental cell, everything builds on it. The state benefits from that healthy family. It benefits from children receiving what only parents can bring. And the state understood this and supported it and encouraged it and protected it and actually defended it by not having divorce and by not allowing this to occur. But the state, sadly, because of progressive values, because of secularism, and because we can always go back even, to the point of the French Revolution and, the whole progressive movement, in the assault on the family and the fact that many of the systems, the ideologies of government today look at the family as a product, as an ownership of the state in a sense, but that's false, completely false. And as Pope John Paul II, as Pope Francis, and many other pontiffs have noted, that the family supersedes the state. It existed before the state. And so the state does not have the right to impose itself and impose its ideologies and to assault the family. And so the state has something to gain. Think of all the things we've talked about before, just kind of bouncing around in other podcasts, but think of the amount of money that is spent because of the broken families. Think of how much money the state is having through child services, spending through, advocacy groups, legal counsel, the whole issue of social services that are out there. All things that maybe could be good, like some of the social services, some of the outreach, but the idea that the amount of money being spent, all right, because we've allowed these assaults to occur, has imposed burden upon society. But if we flip that around and realize that if we would return back to a mindset where marriage is between one man, one woman, in an indissoluble, exclusive, fruitful union, that it's an unbreakable bond. And yes, there could be moments, Colleen, that where a separation may have to occur. There may be a need for legal consequences as a result. But what does the church say? This is an unbreakable bond. And so we need to protect that bond, and we need to pray that maybe through acts of mercy, reconciliation, through ways of approach to help the couple to reconcile for their good, the good of their children, and the good of society.
You just brought up a devil's advocate question that I had, because I was just thinking about this, looking through some potential devil's advocate arguments in favor of legal divorce. And in those situations, wouldn't it make sense that the church always upholds the sacramental marriage is till death do part, but then the state has to look at the practical. There's situations where separation does occur. Wouldn't legal divorce allow for civil mechanisms to exist to be able to navigate that, to force the spouse that abandoned to pay child support, for instance, or something more civilly oriented like that doesn't have to do with the sanctity of marriage in a sacramental way, but has to do with navigating the situations practically caused if that falls apart?
So let's start, first of all, that the teaching of the church is not just for Catholics. And so that the fundamental teaching about the fidelity and the beauty of marriage and the nature of marriage does not just belong to Catholics. It belongs to all of humanity because it's a single truth. And so the church has a vested interest not only in her own membership and protecting the interests of her own membership, but really salvation is for all. The message of salvation is for all. The truth is for all. And so she has a vested interest in the common good, the good of all right, which we are all part of. We all exist within society. We all function within society. And if we assault this fundamental cell, it's not like we're going to be able to isolate just the Catholics over here on the side. We all suffer as a result in society when there's a breakdown within that fundamental cell. So it's not an isolated community. We belong to a community. We belong to a society. And so the church has a concern, a vested concern, and a rightful duty to work within that to bring about that good and to protect that good. Now, to the point that you mentioned, because we have circumstances, of course the church, because of those circumstances, is going to advocate for the good. And that is because we are in these current situations, yes, there may be a justice issue, a social doctrine issue that comes to bear. So you mentioned child support. You mentioned making sure that there's health care, making sure that a person who has abandoned their duty is held accountable to care for their children. The church is going to advocate for those great goods, but these are not what, as Jesus says in Matthew 19, this is not how it was in the beginning in reference to the issue of divorce. What did Jesus say? It's because of the hardness of your hearts that Moses gave a writ of divorce. So the church would respond the same way. We have these circumstances. We may have legal issues. We may have, but this is not where we want to be. This is not where we should be. So it's constantly calling us back to that single truth, to that single good. And we should never lose that prophetic voice. We should never, no matter what happens, we should never lose that voice. I know it's hard for you and I to understand this because we didn't grow up in a culture like this.
No, it's
right?
so normalized here.
So
just
if
the
you live in the
ability to get a
Philippines,
civil
of
divorce.
course, you would feel this, right? Because you're growing up in this reality. But here, in our own country, we haven't seen this since divorce was legalized in the 1960s, if I remember correctly. But the idea is that prior to this period, there's a vested interest. And so there not only a mindset, but the approachments, laws, policies, the way of local governance, the way local magistrates dealt with problems, because we're dealing with human nature. All right. We're not dealing with a perfect humanity. So obviously there were situations that approached civil society to say we have this situation, but there was always this understanding that it's better to promote the fidelity and the stability of the marriage and to uphold it. And of course, there were always those extraordinary situations, just like there are today. All right.
Yeah.
But society itself approach it. And we're not going to do it here, but I can tell you many stories of judges that I knew in my early priesthood, now pastorness, who would tell me stories about when families would approach the bench, approach the court, with various dilemmas. But always what would happen is the judge would always seek the good of maintaining, the stability of the marriage. Yeah. And if it needed counsel, they would seek ways of giving counsel. I remember one justice, magistrate, even would call the local parish priest himself and say, I have Mr. and Mrs. So-and-so here. They're having issues, right? I'd like to send them to you. This was something where everyone was collaborating in promoting this great good, supporting the good, advocating for the good, and recognizing that this is the best thing for children. And you know why? Because we know that the effects of divorce are their children are higher at risk for emotional, academic, and behavioral problems. There's a spiritual wound. We've had podcasts on this where even adults of divorced parents who were children at the time still carry this wound forward. It affects the way many people even approach their understanding of marriage.
Yeah.
Many people turn to cohabitation, thinking because they don't want to be married, thinking that cohabitating gets them out of this possibility but we all know that's not true.
I think that's actually one of the reasons for the rise of cohabitation in today's world. I think you have a generation of young adults, now adults, who grew up with their parents divorced, who look at that and say, I don't want to do that. I need to do the test run of the marriage ahead of time to make sure that this works. And obviously that's a not correct way to look at it, and it's going to lead to higher divorce rates later on. But I do think that that's the kind of subconscious force driving a lot of cohabitation.
So let me reinforce that. So divorce was legalized in New Zealand in the 1800s, late 1800s.
Okay.
Right? I just came from New Zealand on a mission, so it's fresh in my mind. So I won't know the dates all perfectly, right? I can always give them to you if you want to put them in the show notes. I have them. But in reality, that, Michelle Kaufman, who's the director for Family Life International, gave the presentation before I began all the seminars.
Okay.
How did we get here? Why are we where we are? And so she went through the history. So if we think about the fact that a mindset of divorce comes in the late, latter part of the 1800s. So moving forward, how does that affect people's approach to marriage? She gave a statistic. So in the 1960s, and this is out of 1,000 people who, of a number, it was around 39 or 40 people sought marriage. That's already low.
That's very low, especially for the 60s.
Move forward into the 1990s, number was about 18. Go to 2024, 8 out of 1,000. So what you just said is proven by what we see in data. So when you have this mindset, it affects the way people approach even an understanding of marriage, understanding why even consider marriage. And what we also see is high rates of cohabitation. But what we also see with high rates of cohabitation is still separation. We still see the same consequences that are there. And so think of how this affects children. I wrote this in a recent article that, children are, depends on who gets custody of them, but eventually they're passed, introduced to the boyfriend or girlfriend of their parent, maybe multiple boyfriends, girlfriends, and they're introduced to all these different people. There's no stability. And the great harms, it may not be the intention of the parent by any means, a sense of seeking some struggle or some difficulty or some harm, but it inevitably becomes a harm.
Yeah.
And so this is something, that I, again, just showing you what happens with that mindset. So this is what's going on in our own country.
Do you happen to know when it says that they sought marriage? Are those people that actively went to get married and actively got married, or people who wanted to get married?
These are people that considered marriage and pursued marriage.
Okay, interesting.
So the numbers are very, very low.
I kind of wonder, out of those numbers, how many people would have wanted to get married and were not in a relationship or not in a situation where they felt like they could.
Right.
Or
you'd have to dig deeper into the data.
Exactly.
But data is very important. And, even though we might have problems with the state, usually their data collection and analysis are very insightful.
Brett Cooper did an episode the other day. I was just listening to it last night on how basically we don't need a baby boom, we need a marriage boom. And talking about the number of people who want kids is much higher than I think it used to be. But the number of people who want to get married or actively get married, or the age that they get married is older. So basically the idea was that people want kids, but they're not having the marriage situation to be able to welcome the kids that they want.
And also, just go back to your question, the state. So we've talked about this several times, and I've written about it several times, is how does the state look at family? How does it pursue the good of the family? But when you have high taxation, high cost of goods, high cost of housing, high cost of education, high cost of healthcare, these things do not promote family. They undermine the family. And they sadly, cause people to question, an openness to children. Not that those should ever be excuses not to welcome a child, but we cannot ignore the fact that they are influential and they do impact the way people approach. So back to the state's approach and investment. So if a family is nothing more than a cog in the wheel, then like any cog, it might get attention, might not get any attention. But if it's a fundamental cell, if it's where everything grows from, then the state has a concern about making sure that this cradle is protected, it's safeguarded, so that society benefits from it. And as society benefits, then our approach to solidarity, our approach to stewardship, our approach to subsidiarity, all these things come to bear the common good that we've been talking about. So this is why I've been really, really heavily focusing on this topic, in the mission field over the last 2 years. And not that we not talked about it before, but I've been very intentional in talking about the family. And because, I have a quote here, that from John Paul II that I think is very, very powerful for us to remember. And he says, the family is the path of the church. It's the path. So even for the church herself, she needs to refocus her attention. She needs to recognize, and she does in her teaching, but through her membership. How do we also see this as a path? How are we seeing the family as the remedy? How are we approaching this on diocesan level in our pastoral framework and planning? How is it on the fundamental level in parish ministry in its pastoral framework? Where does the family fit into this, right? How do we support the family? Now, think even broader. How does it affect our Catholic institutions, our Catholic healthcare systems? How does it affect Catholic education? We all know these are very costly, right? And there are many reasons why. But we need to assess that. And how do we address also the fact that many of these institutions, Colleen, are not Catholic? They have a Catholic name. They might be owned by a Catholic entity, but they're not necessarily Catholic. And we know that sadly, many of these institutions are causing harm to family because they're not helping parents in their primary role. They're taking over that role and introducing children into ideologies that are false. So this is nothing that we're unaware of. It's scandalous, it's shameful behavior, and it needs to change.
One thing that I think is so important is the need for the church to help create the culture that helps young people get to marriage, stay married, welcome children. And I think it was Dr. Pat Fagan was talking about when he was on the show, how like a couple getting married and dating and all that was like a boat in a stream. And the stream kind of guided them down that path. And that stream was the broader culture. And now that you don't have that broader culture, it's a lot more work and it's a lot harder. And a lot of people don't know where to turn. They don't know what to do. And I would love to do an episode if anyone listening knows of a parish that has done this really well or knows an organization that's like talking about practical ways that you can implement this in your parish of how to actually create that culture with very practical tips, because I think a lot of people floundering and they don't know what to do.
Exactly. And I mean, if you think about Pope Leo just mentioning about the family, he said it's a gift, but it's also has a duty, has a task. So if as a gift, we have to treat it as a gift, which means it's a value. It has a value in itself that must be protected, but there also is a duty toward the family, but a duty of the family. So we don't let our light and hide it underneath the table. We place it on a stand where everybody in the house can see it. So this is why it's a path. That's, for John Paul's phrase, and why for Pope Leo XIV speaking about gift and task. And he also called upon what you just mentioned. We need models. We need examples. We have now almost 2 generations of people, of groups of people that have no experience of what you and I are really talking about. They have come from wounded situations. They continue to manifest those wounded situations. And there's no one really modeling from their godparents, their grandparents, from their own parents. So we have to introduce. The other thing which you mentioned is how can the parishes support the family itself? I'm just going to speak spiritually just for the moment. And that would be, how do we help our families, parents particularly? So how do we help them to see that a family that prays together stays together, right? Coining this beautiful phrase that's been coined before, right? But the idea of reminding people this is a truth, and as I mentioned in my recent article, just a basic function of the family eating together. Get rid of the technology that occupies and has become so primary in most families. Don't eat together. Don't pray together. Everyone is individual, doing their own thing. We have people that, spend more time watching TV and participating on social media platforms. And though we're using a media platform to promote a great good, this is not something we do 24 hours a day, 12 hours a day, not even 5 hours a day. This is something that we realize it's a tool. It should not be the center of our lives.
Yeah.
But sadly, it is. And so many of our families waste so much time on this platform, on these social platforms, and not on each other, communicating, helping it. How's your day? What was your day like? Fostering these values.
Have you ever seen the movie Babette's Feast?
No.
Oh, that's going to be my homework for you. It's basically a whole movie about the importance of eating together. When I was reading your article, it was the first thing that came to mind, was just the movie is basically about how this French chef prepares this beautiful, beautiful, amazing meal for this very, I think they're very Puritan, I think, community. I'm not sure what the actual denomination is in, I don't remember which country it's in. Anyway, they're not in France. Anyway, this French chef comes, creates this beautiful meal, and it ends up bringing everyone together. And this is the type of community that looks askance at the things of the world.
Right.
That is, we're going to eat our very simple meal. We're going to go pray on the very hard ground, and there's no humanness. And it's like the French chef comes in and brings this kind of Catholic idea of uniting people around food. And so obviously, even though it's not actually Catholic, it's this beautiful example of what eating together and sharing an amazing meal can do for strengthening community bonds.
Exactly. And also the value that it also teaches, so that you realize that the food that mom or dad or someone has prepared has to feed the family.
Yeah.
So also learning to be not selfish and eating what's there before you and appreciating gratitude, recognition. I mean, as we all remember, people telling us, probably still say today, there are people that would want those leftovers. But there is a profound truth in not wasting and being mindful of others. This is all learned at a table.
Yeah.
Manners are learned. Also recognition of other people. I mean, when I was young, it was always, from the young children, because we couldn't fit everybody at a table, but younger children were fed first. Our elderly were fed first, and so then people would start gathering after that and together. These are all learned around a table. And this is why it's important, the sanctuary of the family, the cradle of the family, back to Pope Leo. So what I love about the Holy Father, again, not that there's a new doctrine, but what he's doing is he's fanning a truth and giving new terms, if you will. And there's a wonderful phrase. I pulled my article so I can make reference to it. I loved this phrase. If I can put my pause on it really, really quick. And he talks about, the family in such a way. He says, to be a domestic church and a hearth, where the fire of the Holy Spirit burns, spreading his warmth to all and inviting everyone to this hope. I mean, a burning fire. Yeah. This is something, again, the Holy Father is really just promoting a conversation. And so I would say that back to the Philippines where we started, that this is the leverage that the church in the Philippines has still.
Yes.
That they have an opportunity, their voice is appreciated, respected. The majority of people want the guidance. They're looking toward the leadership. And the culture itself, as you just mentioned, Dr. Pat Fagan, in the sense of there is a stream, in a sense of culture that's helping to flow around, right? But I've been there 16 times. Yeah. I'm watching the problems. So this is why, back to the vigilance, being on guard. And I believe what the state in the Philippines is attempting is violent.
Yeah.
It's a vileness that needs to be called out, that this is unacceptable.
I have a question for you that I'm sure might be in our audience's minds. So we're here in the Western world where all sorts of atrocities are legalized, normalized, becoming more and more common. So you have not just divorce, but surrogacy, IVF, abortion, you name it, same-sex, quote-unquote marriage, all of these problems. Why is the legalizing of divorce such a big deal? How does it open the floodgates to all of those other issues?
Right.
Because I feel like some people might look at it and say, why should we care about legalizing divorce? That is such a minor issue compared to the insanity that's in the Western world.
Right. So just to that latter point. So if we're dealing with a fundamental cell, a primary cell of society, any assault on it obviously speaks for itself. We all are going to be affected by it. So it's not just a small little part of a problem. It is very much a systemic of a major problem. And that's what I want to say, that these are all systemic issues that flow from a fundamental issue. And that is when we don't understand the nature of the human person, the inalienable dignity of the human person, and when we don't understand the sacred institution of marriage, and when we don't understand the beauty and wonder of conjugal love and the nature of marriage and its beautiful reflection of God Himself, this fidelity, stability, this indissolubility, all this is present. So we got to get underneath all of it and look at what is it really assaulting here. What is it at? And Pope John Paul II in Evangelium Vitae, Colleen, mentioned this when he spoke about contraception and abortion itself. He said they flow both from the same rotten tree, right? So again, they're symptoms of something deeper, a rejection of God's design, a rejection of God's design in the nature of a thing, and the nature that is who the human person is, right? Made in the image and likeness of God. What is marriage? What is its nature? What is its purpose? Who the Creator designed it. And that's why our Lord reminds us this is not how it was in the beginning. So it's a return back to the Creator's vision and what life the Creator has endowed upon this sacred institution. So it is important to see that all the things you mentioned all flow from the assault. Pope John Paul II in 1979 met with our founder, Father Paul Marx. And it was in that conversation where Father Paul Marx made clear note that this assault through contraception on marriage and conjugal love would lead to the continued legalization of abortion, which would lead to the legalization of euthanasia. We would see the eventual assault on the definition of marriage, where people would then advocate for same-sex union, in other words, advocating for homosexual behavior. We would see it grow into other assaults on conjugal love, which now we see in the artificial reproductive technologies of today, i.e. in vitro fertilization, surrogacy, cloning, embryonic stem cell research, and a litany of other problems. So all of it flows, and this is when John Paul told Father Marx that the message that HLI was bringing around the world, he said that if you bring this message, which is the path forward, right, the remedy, then you will be doing the most important work on earth. And that is why HLI has always made the issue of contraception a fundamental target subject, because it's a symptom of an assault on a great good. And so for the state to legalize this assault in the United States in the 1960s, to legalize divorce, to legalize all these other assaults on marriage, to try to redefine it, to remake it in its own secular image, undermines this great good. And as a result, we all suffer from it. Look at the violence in our culture. Look at the number of children preborn murdered every year in the name of a law, right? And some so-called permissiveness. False. Look at the amount of elderly people today, handicapped people, vulnerable people, now victim to the mindset of euthanasia, assisted suicide. Look at how we take embryonic life and we manipulate it and research it upon it. This is a human life that has tremendous value in itself, like myself. No one has a right to do this, but this is happening every day in the name of science, in the name of progress. Think of the way that now we manipulate human life through in vitro fertilization. We separate the welcoming of human life and the generation of human life from a conjugal act. Now bring it into a laboratory where a technician is manipulating cells and gametes and creating human life. And now we're going to take this and we're going to now, hire someone, right, through surrogacy. All the things that Pope Francis talked about, from hiring a hitman to kill the child, to hiring people in a contractual relationship to gestate a child, and then we're going to sell the child. We're going to create a contract. Think of all this language. It's vile. It assaults a great good, this cradle. And so the state has been harmful in this. The state has caused great harm, and the state is culpable for the damage it has done to civil society because it has assaulted the fundamental self. So this is why in the Philippines, we have to fight.
Yeah.
We have to fight to protect this good. Father Marx once said, if Ireland falls and the Philippines fall, we're done. Now, what does that mean? I wasn't there when Father Marx said it in the context, but I can process what that means. And I can see what it means. Ireland today is struggling because it has given way to these great harms, advocated for them, actually voted for them, all right, and promoting them, right? I was just in Ireland twice this year, to see it with my own eyes. So these are things, Colleen, that we must continue to be prophets upon. And I would close with this or toss it back to you. You're in charge of when closing occurs. but the idea that I think of my brothers in parishes, how hard it is.
Yeah.
Because within our family congregation, people we love, people we care for, people we serve, not just the people in our pews, all the people of God, and not just the Catholics. We care for all of God's people. And it really is painful when you have to address them. But the problem in addressment is that you get hate mail. You get phone calls. People storm out of the church. They are angry at you. They insult you in public forums. They write the local bishop, depending on where the bishop falls on this. No one wants to have to deal with all these things. So you get pressure from even leadership. Don't talk about it. Don't address it. That's not the answer.
Yeah.
And so it's a difficulty because there is a great wound in our church. And so ignoring it doesn't resolve it. Pretending it doesn't exist doesn't transform it. And not willing to endure suffering because of fear of that suffering is not a proper response. The proper response is, how do we, as a diocesan church, in the local church, as how the church would speak of it, how does the local shepherd, in collaboration with the priest, address these issues? How do we provide avenues of healing, of reconciliation? How do we call out the great good by working with young couples preparing for marriage, young couples married, young parents? How do we help support them? How do we work in support of them with their children? How do we work with adolescents? How do we work with young couples moving toward, or young adolescents preparing for marriage, thinking of marriage? All that has to change. And because why? Because everything around it no longer sustains that mindset.
Yeah.
We can't depend on any of it.
No.
So we have to create that culture, that society. The church is a vital component in making this transformation occur. She cannot ignore her prophetic role. She cannot ignore her call and missionary identity to mission, what John Paul said, evangelize, which is within the church. That's where we have to start.
Amen.
That's the challenge.
Well, thank you, Father. That's a good, hopeful. I mean, it's a challenge, but it's still hopeful to end on. So, and to any of our audience, if you're interested in hearing more about the situation in the Philippines, please let me know in the comment section. I'm hoping to do an episode with Dr. Ligaya Acosta in a couple of months, and we can address it on that episode if you have any particular questions. So please let us know in the comment section. And thank you very much, Father, for this conversation.
Great to be with you again, Colleen. Look forward to the next one.
Same. And to all of our audience, please like and subscribe and check out the new ebooks that we have coming out. As always, keep on living the culture of life. God bless.